At 1:23 a.m. on April 26, 1986, something unimaginable tore open. A reactor in Chernobyl ruptured. A mushrooming explosion. A silent war inside atoms unleashed. But beyond the physics, beyond the plume, there was a human moment. The instant when ordinary men firefighters raced toward the glowing heart of destruction, not knowing the cost. This is their final 72 hours. Their laughter, their fear, their suffering, and the world that almost didn't know their names. The call to flames. In the quiet of night, the plant's alarm shattered the stillness. The staff, firefighters, the men stationed within Chernobyl's compound heard the blast before they began to understand what it was. Lieutenant Volodymyr Pravik and his crew were among the first to respond. They thought it was a mechanical fire, a pipe burst, a transformer. No one told them this was no ordinary blaze. They clambered into trucks, sirens in the darkness. As they approached, they saw the roof torn open. Sheets of metal, concrete fragments, graphite, flames licking from impossible places. The roofs of the turbine hall, the ventilation shafts, the corridors between reactors all aflame, bitumen burning, smoke thick and dark. The wind carried a silent poison. They laid hoses, climbed fire escapes, and ascended to the roof. But the fires were not only on the surface. Embedded embers of nuclear fuel and graphite glowed like embers in a furnace. Each step upward was a gamble. How deep was the radiation beneath? One of the city's firefighters, Mykola Tetenok, drove from Pripyat to help. At 1:35 a.m., his unit parked near the turbine hall, rushed out, pulled hoses, moved toward the reactor's northern face. He was ordered to reposition to suppress a fire on the roof of the ventilation block. He and his comrades, Volodymyr Kibanuk, Nikolai Vaschuk, prepared to climb to their doom. They had no suits, no breathing filters worthy of what they faced. They had helmets, jackets, boots. They had commitment. On the roof, the bitumen burned. It melted and stuck to boots, glowed underfoot, made their steps treacherous. Smoke thickened. They stomped out glowing pieces of uranium or graphite. Their hoses sputtered. They lost pressure. Water instantly vaporized. Flames recurred. Residue of nuclear fuel glowed among the ruins. Some men began to collapse. Vladimir Tushura fell first, wretchedly vomiting, muscles failing. Minutes later, Tetenok himself could no longer stand. They were brought down by their brothers in arms. Some carried, some stumbled. Once off the roof, ragged and burning, they were stripped of their gear, ordered to await ambulances in a nearby building. They had been exposed to what no one yet fully understood. By 2:35 a.m., ambulances arrived. They would be rushed to Pripyat Hospital, Medical Unit number 126, to await the slow, agonizing toll of radiation's hidden blade. But this was only the opening act in those final 72 hours. As fire crews scoured the roofs and halls, they did not know what they inhaled. They did not know that the reactor's graphite core, superheated, was burning fiercely, releasing prismatic clouds of radioactive dust, debris, isotopes untold. It is now estimated that the dose rates on the roof could reach 20,000 roentgens per hour, many times over what would kill a person in minutes. Inside the plant, floors of cables and wiring caught fire, the corridors filled with apnea-inducing smoke. Firefighters in the lower levels fought those fires too, unaware they moved deeper into the radioactive heart. The control room operators were frantic. The plant's power systems flickered. Reactor 3, still operating, stood at risk. If fire spread, there could be a chain reaction cascade. The logic of containment fought the chaos of explosion. Authorities and higher-ups listened to alarms. Radiation detectors flared red in adjacent plants in Sweden, signaling to the world that something monstrous had broken loose. But Soviet officials in Chernobyl would remain silent for tens of hours. Back in Pripyat Hospital, the first wounded arrived. Firefighters, plant staff, watchers. Their clothes carried invisible weight. There was no decontamination. They were admitted straight away. In the hospital's basement, their suits, helmets, gloves were discarded and left in darkness. Even today, some still emit radiation. Each man's body would betray him. Skin reddened, blistered, bones ached, bone marrow failed, organs hemorrhaged, vomit, blood, internal collapse. Some held for days, others hours. The truth was horrifying. Among them was Lieutenant Pravik himself. He would later die on May 11th from acute radiation syndrome. And there was Vasily Ignatenko, age 25, one of the most tragic figures of the disaster. He climbed to the roof, inhaled the radioactive smoke, tried to carry comrades, and in days would be consumed by a slow, excruciating death. His wife, Ludmila, watched him shrivel, watched his body betray him. At his funeral, he was buried barefoot, in a coffin of lead and concrete, lest the contamination leak outward. In total, 28 plant firefighters and staff died in the first months from acute poisoning. More would follow. But the final 72 hours, those were the hours when the sacrifice was most intense, when decisions had to be made in darkness beyond logic, where courage was not heroic choice, but the only choice. Choices in the dark. They could not know in advance that many of their colleagues would die. They could not grasp the cost of each breath. They did what duty demanded. On those roofs, some firefighters dared to rise again, to throw water, to smother the flames. Some dragged burned cables, pried open ventilation shafts, choked behind every smoky shroud. They climbed ladders and fire escapes no sane man would. One of the hardest tasks, preventing the fire on the shared roof of Reactor 3. If flames jumped there, Reactor 3's core, still operating, could be ignited. That would make the catastrophe far greater. More radioactive spread, more disaster. The roofs between units were bitumen, flammable. The connections between units were perilously close. By 2:10 a.m. and 2:20 a.m., fires on roofs of Units 3 and 4 were localized. By 5 a.m., firefighters declared many external fires extinguished, all except the core fire itself. But inside, in the reactor building, the meltdown continued. Only external suppression was possible. They could not touch the core. Water pumped in by emergency systems leaked elsewhere. Attempts failed. After the first night, helicopters would dump tons of sand, lead, and clay boron, but much of it never reached the core. In those hours, the firefighters in hospital fought for life. They lay in beds, delirious, racked by fever. Some asked for water, some whispered the names of their wives, their children, their dreams. Some died in convulsions. Some held until dawn broke, and they could not last another hour. As day 1 turned to day 2 and 3, the casualty list grew. Among the living who remained, bodies grew weak, internal collapse loomed. Some were isolated, treatments were primitive. Most patients, even healthy-looking men, would not survive. The Soviet system, slow to admit, was overwhelmed by the scale. Outside the hospital walls, the official word was silence. How long could they hide what was happening? How many families would lose husbands, sons, fathers? How long before the world would sense the true horror? The uncertain legacy. When silence broke, the narrative that emerged was halting. The Soviet government offered minimal admissions, a mere admission, a local fire. Days passed before evacuations began. Tens of thousands would be displaced. Over time, state propaganda would label many illnesses radiophobia, deny the link between contamination and deaths. Survivors would fight for recognition, compensation, truth. Some of those firefighters and their widows would be forgotten in the shifting records of history. Their names would flicker in memorials, in footnotes, in hushed remembrance. But the bodies, the suffering, the sacrifice, they could never be erased. And the irony, we speak of Chernobyl as a disaster of atoms, of physics, but in truth it was a disaster of people. People who believed they could stand against an invisible death and bear the cost to protect others. In recent years, newly unearthed footage and interviews have given voice to what was silent. In Chernobyl, the lost tapes, the white flashes in archival film are not artifacts. Many were radiation particles striking film itself. We learned that many survivors felt themselves used, betrayed by a system that withheld facts, dismissed their pain, refused accountability. We see spouses, children, memories torn by grief.
The full death toll we still do not know. Some estimate early acute deaths in the dozens or in the low hundreds. Others believe the long-term cancers, thyroid diseases, genetic damage number in the many thousands. In the quiet that remained after those final 72 hours, the world hardly paused. Chernobyl became a hushed zone, the plant sealed in a sarcophagus, the land evacuated. Time passed. The memory faded in many minds. But if you stand now amid ruins, broken concrete, ghostly cooling towers, you can still feel it, the heat,